Hi there, I'm Dr. Andrea Shanowski from Freedom Chiropractic and Holistic Health here in Peoria, Illinois, and welcome to my channel, Health and Horsepower. The whole reason that I have this channel is to educate you on how your body works, how it heals, and also how it functions, or when there's dysfunction going on, what you should be doing about that to get your health back so you don't have to rely on medications or surgeries to keep things going. Now, I'm really excited because today I want to talk to you a little bit more about hormones. So we're going to talk how to balance your hormones for more energy, better sleep, and also for weight loss. Now, I know that we're coming into the holidays and nobody really wants to hear about weight loss right now, but I do want to tell you that your hormones can either work for you or against you. So I want to talk about 3 life-changing hormones that can work for you and help your body heal and function properly, but also some things that can go wrong with those hormones. So for today, it is going to be really in-depth and very wordy. If you are not familiar with some of these hormones, we do have another video called Stress and Hormones on the channel. So if you go to my channel and subscribe, you can also search through some of our previous videos. We have one on stress and hormones that kind of takes a more laid-back approach to hormone balance and things like that, and how that can affect a lot of different aspects of your health. But for today, we're going to be getting majorly in-depth about these 3 main hormones. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and then we'll go ahead and go through these 3 hormones here. So let me go ahead and get my screen shared, and then we'll get started for today. So when it comes to your hormones, like I said, there are 3 really big hormones that help with energy, sleep, and weight loss. So those 3 hormones are number 1, serotonin, which is produced in your brain. We have insulin produced in our pancreas, and cortisol, which is produced in our adrenal gland. Now, you may or may not have heard of these hormones before. We're going to talk a little bit more about how and where they're produced, and symptoms we can get if we don't have enough or they're out of balance, and then how we can actually get those back on track. So we're going to go ahead and get started with serotonin. So secret number 1 to more energy, better sleep, and also weight loss is increasing your serotonin levels. So serotonin is produced in the brain. It is a brain hormone or neurotransmitter that helps direct the function of your body. Now, really interesting is this actually controls the appetite centers in your brain. It tells your brain that your hunger has been satisfied and that you're full when you are done eating. Now, normally when we eat, it takes about 20 minutes for our body to produce hormones to let us know, hey, there's enough down here, you can stop eating. A lot of times, if we don't have the right balance of this, we may not really feel that signal from our brain telling us to stop eating. But what will happen is we will actually feel our stomach stretch when we packed it really full. And what can actually happen is you can stretch and enlarge your stomach, and then it is much easier to overeat because you're not having that hormone telling you when to stop eating. You're eating until your stomach is stretching and actually painful. So that serotonin level, when it is in the proper range, is going to help put the brakes on your food and calorie intake so you can eat just what you need and not to your bursting. And like I said, this is also the feel-good neurotransmitter. So this one also helps you feel good. Deficiencies have been linked with a lot of health conditions, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But one thing I really want you to understand is if you don't have enough serotonin, about 95% of it is used in your gut. So if we have a deficiency, that can cause food allergies, digestive issues, as well as a lot of other symptoms. So when we have low serotonin levels, that can mean we have gut dysfunction or a gut that is not working properly. That can cause symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome or frequency and having to use the bathroom really quickly after eating or eating certain foods. We can also see some of the research has shown that bipolar disorder has also been linked with serotonin deficiency. So if your body and your brain do not have enough serotonin, that can also cause not only gut and kind of nutritional deficiencies, but it also affects how your body and your brain communicate with each other, and that can lead to some mental health disorders. We can also see chronic pain when your serotonin levels are low. A lot of times we are going to see digestive issues. We can see deficiencies that can lead to our pain responses being a little heightened. And we can also see symptoms of fibromyalgia. So if you have fibromyalgia or know somebody that does, chances are they may actually have some of a nutritional deficiency going on or a serotonin deficiency that could also be playing a part in their pain level. So it's really important to understand that serotonin is super important, not only for digestion, but gut function as well as your brain function. So serotonin deficiency syndrome is one of the most commonly treated neurotransmitter deficiencies. 1 in 10 Americans and 1 out of 4 women typically are treated for this in the US. Currently, there's about 28 million Americans that are currently on SSRI or serotonin reuptake inhibitor drugs, such as Xanax, Prozac, and antidepressants that are basically being treated for serotonin deficiency. So a lot of these medications basically recycle serotonin. So it's not always the most efficient because you're reusing something that may not be working 100% properly when you utilize it over and over again. And a lot of times when your body is making serotonin and it sees that there's already some there, your body may actually slow or shut down serotonin production. So in the long term, this can cause you to recycle serotonin, but also cause you to not produce enough in the long term. So a lot of times antidepressants have also been linked with some pretty serious side effects, especially in adolescents and young adults. So like I said, a lot of people are dealing with this syndrome and a lot of people are getting treated for this with antidepressant medications. Now, so symptoms of deficiency. So if you are having sugar cravings or overeating, that can indicate that you may have a deficiency of that. We can also see depression, migraines or headaches can also be another symptom of serotonin deficiency, anxiety and panic attacks, insomnia, irritability and anger, because a lot of times since serotonin helps with mood stabilization, you may be getting angry or more irritable easier. So if you notice you have kind of a short fuse, that may be a sign that this hormone may not be working properly for you. So serotonin deficient, you can actually have alcohol can actually cause and play a part where basically as alcohol is working inside your body, it can reduce that production of serotonin. We can also see nicotine and caffeine are also playing a part in that too. Sugar is another thing, as well as diet medications can cause serotonin deficiencies. Ephedra and diet medications is one of the biggest offenders. Guarana is another one. We can also see psych meds can cause some serotonin deficiency. Like I mentioned, when you take some of those SSRI meds long term, that can cause your body to produce less in the long run. We can also see stress raises cortisol, which will actually cause your brain not to, and actually kind of depress and not produce enough of that. We'll talk a little bit more about stress and cortisol, which is one of our other three hormones that we're going to be talking about today. Chocolate can also cause some serotonin deficiency as well, because that's going to bind to those same sugar receptors in the brain. So when we look at neurotransmitter deficiencies, and I'm going to use my mouse to kind of show here. So typically you have basically synapses in your brain that release these neurotransmitters, and we have these receptors inside of our cells that will take in that neurotransmitter and bind to it and say, okay, we are bound, we are active, we are working. So when your body produces serotonin, those are going to bind to these receptors and give a signal, that feel-good hormone, that hormone that helps our body function. Now, what can happen is when we have that chemical substance, it kind of flows like electricity from one end of the nerve to the next, and that will permit thoughts, actions, and function. Now, what can happen is as we have that flow through from one nerve to the next, and it signals the brain and signals that pathway to work. Now, when we have deficiency, so say, for example, we only have two little dots of this neurotransmitter, and we have lots of receptors open waiting for it, that can mean that we are craving those neurotransmitters and things may not be working properly. So what will happen is if you need more of that, your body will actually increase receptors and increase cravings for those neurotransmitters, which will signal your body to produce more. However, if you have some of those things that work against making the serotonin, we can see where your body is not able to keep up with the demand, or it doesn't have the resources to make more of that serotonin to bind to those receptors that are open. If we see where we have lots and lots and lots of neurotransmitters being produced and we have all those receptors open, those can bind to what's there. But the other thing too is those things that we talked about, sugar, alcohol, and chocolate can also flood those receptors, because sugar can actually bind to some of these receptors. So a lot of times when we think of sugar, chocolate, and alcohol, some of the things that tend to be addictive, they are addictive because they bind to those receptors and make us feel good. Now, what can happen is when we have that overload of that neurotransmitter, your body will automatically have more of those receptors at all times. So when you are not having sugar, chocolate, and alcohol, what will happen is you'll see where your body is craving and craving and craving. And then you have sugar and alcohol and chocolate, and all of a sudden, oh, we get a flood and we're going to feel good. But that's not necessarily what we need to be focusing on. That positive feedback loop, basically that serotonin deficiency, will cause you to crave sugar. So if you tend to crave sugar, that can also be an indicator that you have a serotonin deficiency. And then as you crave sugar, you're going to eat more sugar, which will in turn cause more receptors to be made. and you're going to have a more deficiency. So this feedback loop literally can cause issues for you. So if you are trying to fill that gap with sugar or chocolate or alcohol by kind of filling that gap with flooding those receptors due to those things, that can actually cause this problem to get worse. So one of the things that's really interesting to me is there was a study talked about called Molecules of Emotion by Sandra Pert. She's a PhD. She did a study basically on sugar, and she talked about that sugar is a drug, a highly purified plant product that can become addictive. If you're relying on artificial forms of glucose like sugar, it gives you a quick pick-me-up, but it can be as dangerous as shooting heroin because it's utilized in the same form like a drug. It floods and desensitizes your receptors. So that's going to cause those feedback loops that basically will, yes, give you instant energy, but necessarily are not a good thing because then you're going to constantly be looking for that next high and the next flood, and you're not going to be doing the right things to help actually increase your body's production of those. You're going to be relying on things outside of the body and being addicted to those to fill that gap. So like I mentioned, sugar is a drug, and that's what we've been shown in the research. There was also another research study done in 1980s at Cornell University looking at natural alternatives to narcotics for pain relief. They took mice and put them on a hot plate, and they could stand there for about 10 seconds as a baseline. Then they actually gave them sugar water, and the mice were able to actually stand there for 20 seconds. So what actually happens is your body will get a pain dull response with sugar as well. So when you take the mice pups away from the mom, they can cry about 300 times in a 6-minute time period as a baseline. When they gave them sugar, they only cried 75 times. So that's going to not only increase pain response, it's going to actually dull their emotional response as well. So sugar eases physical and emotional pain, but doesn't necessarily help your body heal or function better. Rather, it binds to those and floods them and can cause addiction. So secret number 2 is insulin. So insulin, like I mentioned, is produced in your pancreas. It is a hormone that is responsible for regulating sugar in the blood. So when you have sugar, it is sent to muscle for storage, and muscle can only store about 475 grams. The rest is turned into fat where you have unlimited storage. Now, when we look at insulin, what tends to happen is basically your body will store 475 grams maximum in your muscles, and then the rest is bound to insulin, and that's going to go to your liver so that your liver can make it into fat, and then we're going to put that in storage. Now, what tends to happen is when you have a lot of sugar, your bloodstream only holds about 1 to 2 teaspoons of glucose at a time. If you look at a glazed donut, we have about 6 teaspoons. So that means that we are going to have that sugar that gets quickly released into our bloodstream. Some will go to muscle and the rest will go into fat. If we look at a fruit yogurt, there's about 8 teaspoons. So it doesn't necessarily correspond with healthy versus unhealthy. Sometimes it's a makeup of what you're eating. In a 16-ounce Cones, we have about 12 teaspoons of sugar. So again, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's healthy or unhealthy. Sometimes it really comes down to the sugar content and how much protein is there to balance that, which I have talked about in some of our weight loss and dietary videos, talking about how you can actually use what you're eating to help boost your metabolism and burn fat. When it comes to insulin and diabetes, basically your body has a program. So when you eat something, your body releases so much insulin to balance that blood sugar and get that level in your muscle, and the rest going to the liver to make fat. When you have poor lifestyle habits, a lot of times you can have insulin regulation problems. So for example, if you are, say, eating something that is artificially sweetened, where it doesn't actually introduce sugar in your body, that sweetness on your tongue is going to signal your body to make insulin. And what tends to happen is when we have that insulin produced, that's going to help to balance the blood sugar by moving sugar around properly. But if we have where your body over releases insulin and we don't really get a change in blood sugar, your body starts to basically resist and ignore, kind of like when the boy cried wolf, and the boy cries wolf over and over and over again. You start to ignore him because he's always crying when it's not really there. What tends to happen is your body will overproduce insulin, and then it starts to ignore it and say, you know, that insulin guy, he's always jumping in there, but there's really nothing for us to do. Everything looks okay. So your body will start ignoring that signal from insulin to move blood sugar around. So when we have no change in blood sugar, we can also get, like, if we look at these 3 different situations. So if we have that insulin where we're not getting a change in blood sugar, or we're seeing blood sugar go way up and down, kind of like a roller coaster, that can be more of that insulin resistance. Now, we can also see where diabetes is when basically your body over responds with insulin, And typically type 1 is more of a pancreas dysfunction where your body is not producing insulin. Type 2 is when your pancreas is more exhausted from having to overwork to balance insulin levels. So if we have an increase in insulin and no change in blood sugar, a lot of times, that's really that insulin response really helps to move that blood sugar around. So what'll happen is when we introduce insulin, that's going to help to balance our blood sugar by moving it into the storage that it needs to. When we see where insulin goes down or it's not being produced enough, we can see where blood sugar rises, or if your body's struggling to move blood sugar around. And sometimes that has to do with stress on other body systems too. So insulin also affects your estrogen level. So when you have high blood sugar levels or high insulin levels, your body will actually increase estrogen, which will increase your risk factor for pretty much every type of cancer out there, but more specifically, that will increase your risk for breast cancer. It'll also decrease thyroid function. So a lot of times we will see fatigue, depression, and sugar cravings when estrogen goes up. The other thing to think about is when your thyroid hormones go down, that will actually cause fat storage. So a lot of times what will happen is that when we have high insulin, we have high estrogen and heavy risk factors for cancers, but it also is going to interfere with thyroid function, which will cause us to gain fat because we're going to be putting everything in storage rather than utilizing it. And guess what? When your fat storage goes up, that's also going to increase your estrogen level even more and also cause your thyroid gland not to work properly. So that cycle can go on and on and on. So just think about it this way. It really comes down to knowing that you have to make sure you're balancing these hormones, because when insulin is not working properly, that'll increase your hormone balance, that'll cause thyroid dysfunction, that'll cause fat storage, and that cycle will keep feeding and feeding and feeding. So here's an example of basically the bloodstream, and this is an example of when we eat broccoli. So when you eat broccoli, you have some glucose molecules that are reused out of the bloodstream. And your body will take insulin, bind to those, and it'll send it to the muscle. And anything left over, it would send to fat cells. But when we eat something like broccoli, typically we have a very low glycemic response. So we're not going to see high levels of glucose being released. When we eat something like cake, though, we get a lot of sugar produced at once. And then your body will release insulin to try to bind to those. And it'll try to take out as many as it can. But when there's leftover insulin, you typically, when you over respond, so you have that hyper response where insulin is overproduced, you have that insulin resistance. So now we have extra insulin floating around and there is no sugar in our bloodstream. So then we're going to have low sugar and we are going to get irritable. We may get tired. We may get depressed. We may get short-tempered when that blood sugar drops. For some people, if they have hypoglycemia, they may also feel lightheaded or even get dizzy or faint. So if you don't have any storage for that blood sugar in your muscle, it's sent to the liver to make fat. And when we increase fat, we also increase estrogen, we decrease thyroid function, and that can cause more issues where you have more fatigue because you have low sugar, but also you're going to crave sugar, which guess what, is going to feed into that positive feedback loop we talked about with serotonin, which will make us feel good when we're eating. So a lot of times we tend to overeat. We tend to eat too much at one time because it makes us feel good. But in reality, it's going to be working against those two hormones, and that can cause a lot of health issues for you. The third hormone we're going to talk about is cortisol. Now, cortisol is probably one of my favorite hormones. I think it's very misunderstood. Like I said, I'm going to get pretty in-depth today on this. So if you want a lighter view, the stress and hormones video that I've done in the past is a great one to kind of get just a broad overview. So when it comes to cortisol, that is produced in your adrenal gland, which sits on top of your kidneys, that little yellow gland. Cortisol is a hormone responsible for responding to stress, and it's released from the adrenal gland. When we have perceived stress, so if you have low blood sugar, if you've worked out very heavily, if somebody's yelling at you, if you have a deadline and you are trying to do a million things at once and feel overwhelmed, your adrenal gland is going to kick into gear, release cortisol to help you deal with that stress. And that cortisol will actually break down your muscle to turn into sugar if we don't have something readily available. So that means that cortisol will not only break down your muscle, which is going to lower your metabolism, but it also is going to decrease thyroid function, decrease metabolism, increase cravings for sugar, and also increase your fatigue level. So again, feeding into that same pathway, that energy, your sleep pathways, you're going to have a lot of that fatigue. And then, of course, weight gain is a big one because we're going to see metabolism and thyroid function go down, which will cause more fat storage. So when we have muscle breakdown, that your body basically takes that cortisol, turns muscle into sugar. Every pound of muscle burns about 18 to 200 calories per day. Now, If we are breaking down that muscle, what's going to happen is you are going to have less muscle mass, which is going to lower your metabolism and more likelihood of gaining fat. So if you have too much cortisol or it's being produced at a chronic level all the time throughout the day because you're crazy stressed, that stress is going to cause weight gain. But chronically, it can actually cause damage to that gland where it doesn't work properly. And we can see hormone imbalance that affects every other body system. So when we look at kind of how your body utilizes the resources, so cholesterol, yes, your body uses cholesterol. It's good for you. Cholesterol is what your body uses to make your hormones. Cholesterol turns into this precursor. I like to call it the Lego block, pregnenolone. Your body uses that pregnenolone to make DHEA, which helps with anti-aging as well as mood and also immune function. And it also turns into progesterone, which is one of your main precursors for pretty much all your other hormones. Progesterone can be turned into aldosterone to help manage blood pressure. So if you have blood pressure that is irregular, low, or high, especially with stress, that may mean you have an issue in the system. Progesterone also can get turned into testosterone and estradiol. So if you are running into hormone balance issues, a lot of times what may be happening is your adrenal gland is actually shutting down these other body systems, saying, no, all of this stuff here goes to the adrenal gland to make cortisol, and nobody else gets any, because the adrenal gland, I like to say, is kind of like a bully. He steals all the resources and there's nothing left over for anybody else. So what can happen is when we're under that chronic stress pathway and that feedback loop, your body will steal away those Lego blocks and those precursors to make cortisol, and there's nothing left to make some of those other hormones and help those other body systems. So typically when it comes to chronic issues, where we have chronic stress or chronic sugar imbalances or chronic things going on in our life with fatigue, with health issues, we may see where we start to get damage to the adrenal gland. So there's basically 3 stages. I like to call these now, these aren't technical terms. The technical term is HPA axis disorder. There's a ton of research out there in HPA axis disorder. But when it comes to adrenal damage, typically we have the first stage, which is called adrenal stress, is what I like to refer to it as. Number 2 is adrenal fatigue, when we start to see some symptoms and some negative effects in our other body systems. And then adrenal exhaustion, where basically your adrenal gland is pretty much damaged and not working like it's supposed to. So adrenal stress, that's stage 1. We're basically on overdrive. We may not have any symptoms at this time. We are dealing with the stress. We rocked it. We got it. We can do it. And you're pushing through that stress. Now, a lot of times if you have stress on a regular basis, you may want to add in some adrenal support to help prevent injury to the gland and also prevent any steal that can cause hormone imbalances. Over time, though, if your body's been in that stress mode and on overdrive for a while and you start running out of gas, we can see where we start to get into that stage 2 or fatigue. With that, we see that our gas tank's starting to run out. We're not quite as full to deal with those stressors. So if we do deal with stress, we kind of crash and burn afterwards. We need some time to kind of relax and bounce back afterwards. With this, we're going to see not only stress response, but we can see anxiety attacks from this. We can see mood swings at this stage. We can see sugar cravings. We can see weight gain. Typically at this stage, we actually need adrenal support and hormone support so that we're not getting a hormone imbalance because of that damage to that gland, where we can start to see where it's not quite working how it's supposed to, and we can start to see some of our hormone balance levels get out of range. And then adrenal exhaustion is basically when your body is in like flatline mode. It's like, I give up, lady. I can't do it anymore. You do it and you handle it. I can't do it anymore. At this stage, typically, we can get symptoms of depression. We can be exhausted. We may be living and literally surviving based upon caffeine, sugar intake, and energy drinks. We may not have a sex drive. We may even have a loss of passion and even just like a drive to fulfill what you're doing on a daily basis. At this point, we actually need adrenal damage repair. We need hormone support, and in some cases, we may need organ support, because what happens is your adrenal gland can actually shut down thyroid function. It can shut down metabolism, mood, sex hormones. We can see even our immune system can be depressed by this. And we can also see where a healing response is much less too. So your body may not be able to heal or function how it's supposed to. So we may also need to help get your organ systems back on track too. Now, typically, when we look at those 3 life-changing hormones, I'll do a little recap here. Serotonin, the feel-good neurotransmitter, that helps with gut function as well as your brain and mood balance. Insulin to balance blood sugar and our mood so that we're not getting hangry. And then we also have cortisol dealing with stress, blood sugar, and kind of just the things we deal with on a daily basis. So if you feel like you need more information or want to know more about what you should start or where you should start with getting some answers, you can come talk to me in the office. Typically for your first visit here in the office, if you haven't been to us before, we do a free consultation where I'll actually sit down one-on-one with you, talking about some of the health concerns that you have and symptoms you're dealing with, and we'll kind of figure out a plan where we need to start. Sometimes we need to start with digestion. Sometimes we need to start with looking at your diet and fixing that. Sometimes we can need to jump right into hormone testing and figure out what is going on, because there are symptoms all over the place. And we also offer lab testing in our office too. So if you haven't had like annual labs, sometimes we may even want to look at your organ systems to make sure that there's nothing that is not functioning properly that could also be affecting your ability to heal. So we have a free health consultation. If you've never been to our office before, that is a one-on-one consult with me where we'll sit down together talking about how we can start living your life instead of just surviving the next day. You can actually give us a call here in the office, 309-689-6200, or you can actually request an appointment online on our website, freedompeoria.org. Like I said, I have a ton more videos on our YouTube channel about a lot of these topics. Some get a little bit more in depth on that cortisol and how that affects their body systems and organs. This one I feel like went a little bit in depth with those 3 hormones that I think are super important to help with energy, sleep, weight gain, and also mood too. So if you have any questions, like I said, just give my office a call, or you can check out our website, request an appointment on there. But hopefully you guys learned something today. I really feel like a lot of times when it comes down to blood sugar balance and it comes down to stress and it comes down to weight gain, we may just need somebody to kind of give us a look at kind of everything all at once and say, okay, here's where we need to start. Let's start number 1. We'll get that working. And then we're going to move to number 2, get that working. Because if we do try to do 50 things at once, it's really hard to get results. So usually I say baby steps. We start with number 1, get it working. Then we move on to number 2, check to see how that's doing. Because a lot of times if you start with number 1, we'll see downstream where as we improve number 1, hey, number 2 is improving. We may not need to do anything. That may have been just all we needed to do was addressing that number 1. So thanks again for tuning in. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video today. Please comment below. Tell me more about some of the symptoms you're having, or if you are craving or dealing with mood imbalances, what do you do for those? Are you looking at, supplements? Are you looking at diet? Are you looking at any of those things? Or do you feel like maybe you learned something today? So comment below, tell me what you learned today. And then in the meantime, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you get alerted when we have new videos. Typically, we have new videos every Wednesday at 5 o'clock. We go live at 5 with a new video to educate you. And again, get you in charge of your healthcare, because you deserve the best healthcare. But in reality, you need to be the biggest proponent of that. So we want to help educate you so you know how to do that. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us for Wellness Wednesday, and have a great rest of your day.